Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Daily Fulham podcast, brought to you, of course, by the Global Sports Podcast Network, the only place to find daily coverage on all 20 Premier League teams, as well as a dedicated podcast for women's football. My name is Gavin Ruffle, and today I'm bringing you your preview for the weekend's game, which sees Fulham at home once again in another London derby as they look to continue their winning streak and make it 4 wins in a row in all competitions. And Fulham have had success in London derbies this season. They've had success in London derbies over the course of the last year. Just that one hiccup away at West Ham, which was an evening to forget, wasn't it? Where they basically gifted the Hammers 3 points at the London Stadium. But since then, they've been a lot better and defensive mistakes have been cut out. And they're back looking good, aren't they? Palace, on the other hand, they've struggled a little bit in their London derbies. They've lost 5 of their 9. Can you think back to the game earlier in the season? Well, that was a Fulham 2-0 victory. It was back-to-back London derbies for them then, as they backed up the late win against Brentford with a 2-0 win at Selhurst Park. A very good performance, wasn't it? Emile Smith-Rowe, this was probably his best game in a Fulham shirt. He was on the score sheet. I think he had one which was disallowed very marginally. I think Alex Iwobi came out after the game saying that he had been in the gym too much. Otherwise, he would have got himself a second goal. It was a late red card for Crystal Palace, but it didn't really make much of an impact. Harry Wilson came off the bench again to wrap things up. Won a few wins this season where you would say it was a comfortable Fulham victory. I know you could say the same thing about last week. Last week's game against Nottingham Forest was a very comfortable game, but the scoreline never made it as comfortable as it should have been, thanks largely to Matt Sells. If you look at the meetings at Craven Cottage between the two sides, well, Fulham have found it hard to win. Their last victory against the Eagles at home was in 2005. In that time, there's been quite a few draws. Last season was no different. Rodrigo Muniz opened the scoring for Fulham. I think this was after his hot streak for Fulham, where he came into the side and was scoring every week. He'd gone through a few games where he wasn't scoring the goals, but he managed to find the back of the net this time, and that goal was cancelled out thanks to a thunderbolt, an absolute pile driver from Jeffrey Schlupp late on in the game to level things up. And that was a time, if you remember, when Oliver Glasner came in as Crystal Palace manager towards the second half of the season, where they were firing on all cylinders. They seemed to be getting the max out of every player. Jean-Philippe Mateta was on a hot streak, and they seemed to win most of their games in the back half of the season, certainly for the last 2 or 3 months, and this was one of the rare results where they didn't win. So on the grand scheme of things, it wasn't a bad point for Fulham at the time, and it was kind of one of those end-of-season games between two sides that didn't have anything riding on it necessarily. Well, we go into this game and Fulham will have aspirations of European football. In order to make that realistic, they'll have to continue the momentum, continue their streak, their run of wins, which they've managed to put together recently during this month. I've said it before, haven't I? That January didn't quite go to plan. Did it necessarily? A couple of disappointing defeats against West Ham and Manchester United, but this month has certainly started a lot better. Victories against Forest and Newcastle, two sides doing very well, so they'll look to make it a 3rd consecutive double over a side in the Premier League, although it probably is tougher than those 2 games, at least the way the season's panned out for Fulham, playing against a team in the bottom half where they seem to have fared better against those sides ahead of them in the table. But if they are to reach their goal of European football, then it's an important game for them to get another victory at home. We don't know at this stage, do we, how many places are going to qualify for Europe next season. There's all the talk about 5 teams qualifying for the Champions League next season due to UEFA coefficients. I haven't looked into all that. That's too nerdy for even someone like me to get involved in. So I don't know. I just hear what people say on TV or on the radio that 5th place looks like it could secure a Champions League place next season, which obviously has a knock-on effect for those other European places, for the Europa League and the Europa Conference League. And Fulham are certainly back in the mix now after writing them off after that defeat against Manchester United. This little run of victories has propelled them up the table. Villa drawing with Liverpool, so they remain in 8th place heading into this one, and a win on the weekend will put them up another place at least for 24 hours, with Newcastle playing against Nottingham Forest on Sunday. It's important now, isn't it, with Fulham having a target. They are in the mix again for European football. Of course, we know they are still involved in the FA Cup, and that'll soon come around again, won't it? But you don't want the league season to fizzle out, and the last couple of victories have now put them in the hunt, put them in with a chance of qualifying for Europe, hasn't it? I say it every podcast seemingly, there is that chance of breaking their record points tally, which may not be a big thing within the dressing room. Marco Silva might not be mentioning it every time, but I think for Fulham as a Premier League club, to do something like that, considering the amount of time they spent in the Premier League, just shows what direction they're heading in, how things are going under Marco Silva. In other news, some disappointing news, a bit of sad news. I'm sure a lot of you would have seen the image of Reece Nelson on social media with him lying on a hospital bed, undergoing surgery. He's received messages of support from some of his ex-Arsenal teammates, the likes of Bukayo Saka and Declan Rice. And it looks like this could potentially keep him out for the remainder of the season now, and maybe we might have seen the last of him in a Fulham shirt. It's a real shame for him, isn't it? He's 24, 25 years old. We're starting to string a run of games together for the first time, well, at least in this country, and then had that setback, that injury against Brighton, but it looked like he was nearing a return a couple of weeks ago. I think it was prior to the Newcastle game, there was talk of him possibly being back, possibly being in contention. Marco Silva was dismissive of that, but it seemed like the recovery was on time, ahead of schedule, and then he's just had another injury setback, and it looks like that's going to keep him out for a significant period of time, possibly until the end of the season, as I said. And you just wonder what the future holds from now, because he is out the contract with Arsenal in the summer. He's gone to Fulham looking for opportunities to play games, possibly put himself in the shop window so he can continue his career in the Premier League, show he is a player with Premier League quality. And I think he was becoming a fan's favourite, wasn't he, in his Fulham appearances. It just cemented his place in the team, was becoming a regular starter. So to sustain that injury is so unfortunate, such bad luck for the player. You do wonder now if Fulham will look at him in the summer with him being out of contract, or maybe the fact that he has had these injuries and he has had a history of injury problems. Maybe that might put Fulham off. Maybe that might put Marco Silva off. But all you can do is wish the player well in his recovery, and hopefully his luck will change and you get a run of games together for a Premier League side, because I think he has ability. Whether that's at Arsenal, whether that's at Fulham, whether that's at someone else, only time will tell. In the next part, I'll be turning my focus of attention onto the visitors, onto the Eagles. But before I do that, let me just tell you a little bit about our sponsors. Here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencastr came out the clear winner, with 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs. It's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencastr. Crystal Palace come into the weekend's game 13th in the league, 9 points behind their London opponent. It's kind of where you expect them to be, isn't it? Crystal Palace are now that established Premier League side. There's been a lot of relegations in their time, in their Premier League history, but now they've consolidated their place in the Premier League. And you expect them to finish anywhere between 11th and 15th. It's kind of what they do. They did have an amazing run towards the end of the season, catapulted themselves into the top half, and maybe the danger of the way they finished is it raised expectations to a point where it was probably beyond where they actually are. I do feel like towards the end of the last season that Glasner was getting the absolute maximum out of his squad, out of the players. They were playing almost above their normal ability, and I kind of did feel that it wasn't sustainable. So all this talk pre-season about challenging for Europe and where it could lead them, I did feel was a bit over the top, and you probably just had to calm expectations a little bit. But having said that, they would have been disappointed with the start they had made to the season, which was very slow. It took them a long while to get their first victory, and they've made the recovery now to the point where they are in mid-table, but they're almost in mid-table mediocrity, in no man's land, where they're too far adrift of competing for places in Europe, but they're not going to get dragged into a relegation dogfight. So it's important now for Glasner, with his team in that position, to keep them motivated so that they don't have their eyes wandering to what's going to happen in the future, and to keep them off the beach, if you can be on the beach in February. But as I said, it was a slow start to the season, and the same can be said for some of their players who enjoyed that hot streak towards the end of last campaign. Jean-Philippe Mateta being the noticeable one, who hit a real purple patch when Glasner first came in after a tricky initial couple of years at Crystal Palace, where he was just kind of going through the motions and he was kind of there. He was existing, but he wasn't really doing anything under Hodgson. New manager, new lease of life, new Jean-Philippe Mateta. He's 27 years of age, which is quite surprising considering he looks about 34. You would say he's in his prime now, at least if he's not in his prime, he's entering his prime, and maybe the slow start to the season for him can be put down to a couple of things. Maybe that level of expectation that I mentioned was just raised to a point where it was unsustainable. And also the fact you can't forget that he was away with the French Olympic team and he did well for them, scored quite a lot of goals in his time in the summer there. But you can look at that in two ways, can't you? You can look at it maybe that he was ready, he had competitive minutes under his belt, that he was ready for when the season started to hit the ground running. Or maybe there was an element of fatigue after playing so many games in such short space of time that he didn't necessarily have the rest of some of the other players. But he seems like he's back to that form we saw at the end of the season. But one of the problems with that is there an over-reliance on Mateta? When he wasn't scoring the goals in the early part of the season, there wasn't anyone else necessarily to take his place in the team or take a bit of the pressure off. Eddie Nketiah, big money signing from Arsenal. He's been a major disappointment. He hasn't netted in the league. And you wonder at this stage, although he's only a few months into his career at Crystal Palace, whether they might look to move him on. But I guess Jean-Philippe Mateta is proof of the fact that players can come alive. It only takes one goal and then the confidence there, and then they become a completely different player. But I think from a Crystal Palace point of view, you would like a bit more support for Mateta at the minute. Eze, another super talented player, probably had a little bit of a difficult summer away with England, but not getting any minutes. Maybe his head might have been turned, links with other clubs. Maybe that might contribute. That might be a reason as to why he's not having quite the season as you would normally expect from him. He's only scored 2 goals from 69 shots, so that's down on the double figures he's contributed in the last couple of seasons, and I'm sure he'll be the first to admit this hasn't been the best season for him. But he's 26 years of age. He's a super talented player. I've rated him. I rated him when he was in the Championship with Queen's Park Rangers, and he will come good again. And speaking of Crystal Palace in Championship, there's kind of a bit of a theme there, isn't it? Because that's how they like to do their business. They bring in players from the Championship, and then they go on to make big profit out of those players, or at least those players go on to shine for them in the Premier League. Eze being an example, Michael Olise as well, going on to Bayern Munich, getting a profit out of that. Adam Wharton we saw coming in from Blackburn Rovers in the second half of the season. He got himself a place in the England squad for the Euros. Even someone like Mark Gahey, I know Mark Gahey signed from Chelsea, but all his senior appearances came in the Championship at Swansea. So if we look at their transfer activity in January, they did bring a couple of players, and I think one of the players that they see as possibly fitting that bill is Eze, coming in from Millwall, scoring on his debut with his first touch against Brentford. And he's probably a player that he might be pushing for a start come the end of the season, especially if Crystal Palace are in a situation where they're not competing for anything, so they might look at squad rotation and giving players an opportunity. But he's probably one you would look at as following in the footsteps of someone like Olise and Eze in the past, that will fit right into their system, right into the way they play. The other signing they did make in January was Ben Chilwell. He's at the different end of the spectrum, very experienced campaigner, but obviously isn't in the plans of Enzo Maresca at Chelsea, so he needed to get away, needed a move. Interesting one on the surface, isn't it? Because Crystal Palace have a good left-back of their own, left wing-back in Tyreek Mitchell. You would say he's cemented his place in the team. He's nailed down that position. So it's interesting why they would go for Ben Chilwell. I gather that there maybe a lack of depth there. They don't have someone else that can play in that position. But I do feel like Ben Chilwell, moving away from Chelsea, needing to get his career back on track, a move that would suit him is one where he's guaranteed first team football, and moving to Crystal Palace, I wonder if he's going to get that first team football. So that's an interesting, curious one for me, because I would say that Tyreek Mitchell would still remain the first choice, but that's the business they've done in January. They are still involved in the FA Cup, and you wonder now, given the situation in the league, given there's not much to play for, whether he might put all his eggs in one basket for the FA Cup, and I know it's a busy week coming up now with a game on the weekend. They've got another game in midweek against Aston Villa. I wonder if there's a situation where they might look to rest and rotate, probably more for the Villa game, and play his strongest team for the game against Millwall, because there's a big opportunity there. And I think there's a batch of Premier League clubs mid-table with some of the teams higher up in the league already been knocked out. There's an opportunity, the knocks for one of those teams. Crystal Palace with a home tie against Championship opposition. Obviously a big game playing against Millwall, local rival for them, so there's no doubt they'll be up for that occasion. So you wonder if he's prioritising the FA Cup now, and every chance that Crystal Palace could possibly get themselves back to Wembley. Of course, they reached the FA Cup final. I can't remember what year it was, but I remember it was under Alan Pardew, wasn't it, when he did that infamous dance. So there's no doubt they'll have their eyes set on a return to Wembley and possibly lifting some silverware. All in all, I think the league campaign, it's kind of gone as you would have expected. Maybe, as I said, the expectations were just at an astronomical level. Probably along with West Ham at the start of the season, given some of the signings they had made. People thought those two clubs would be challenging for Europe. Hasn't panned out that way, but I'm sure Oliver Glasner will be hoping for a strong end to the season, very similar to what they achieved last time around, and maybe they can propel themselves into the top half, make it back-to-back top half finishes. And of course, attention will be focused on the FA Cup, see what they can do there. So that's just a bit of an insight into Crystal Palace and the way things are going for them. In the final part, I'll turn my attention back to this fixture, looking at what we can expect from this match, what we can expect in team news, and I'll be giving my all-important prediction for the game itself.
Your body is unique, and Global Sports Podcast Network has partnered with Bionique, the world's most personalised supplements. Bionique provide 100% tailor-made supplements designed to deliver precisely what your body needs at exactly the right levels to optimise your health. No guessing. So click the link in the show notes. Use the code GSPN2025 for 40% off your first month's subscription. Bionique. Don't settle for off-the-shelf solutions made for just anybody. Get what's right for you right now.
Fulham will no doubt come into this game buoyed by their performance and their display last week against Nottingham Forest. Home wins have been hard to come by recently. You have to go back to early December for their last one prior to the Forest game. But they got everything spot on in that game last week, and it was only thanks to Matt Sells that the score was as close as it was. So they'll hope to take that form into this weekend's game. But as we know, Fulham's form against the bottom half sides isn't great, particularly at Craven Cottage. I saw a stat the other day, which was that Fulham, of their final 13 games, 8 of them are against teams below them in the table, with 5 against the top 7. And ordinarily speaking, you'd be happy for that. You'd fancy your chances in those games, but given the way the season has gone, maybe Fulham fans will be hoping it's the other way round, given their form against those sides above them. So they've got to get themselves up for this game against a team in the lower half of the table. Despite Palace's league position and their loss to Everton last week, their away form can't be underestimated. You have to go back to October the 21st to find the last time they lost an away game in the league. They're 8 unbeaten away from Selhurst, and perhaps more ominously, they haven't conceded in any of the previous 4. In actual fact, they've conceded the least amount of goals in the league, conceded less away from home than the likes of Liverpool, than the likes of Arsenal. All those teams at the top of the league conceded just 11 from their 12 games. And I wonder if this game will take on a similar sort of pattern to the one we saw last week, because Crystal Palace do set up in a similar sort of fashion to Nottingham Forest, in the fact that they do play 5 at the back. You would expect that to be the case here, and they've got that focal point, that big guy up front in Mateta, with support coming behind him from Ismail Assar, and then I guess the position up for grabs in that Palace team is who will play maybe alongside Sarr, because Eze hasn't started the last couple, but you wonder if he might come in for this one. Adam Wharton, I guess, is another one that could possibly come in from that team that lost to Everton. He's been out for a considerable amount of time, he's had a long spell on the sidelines with injury, so he's just coming back. So you wonder if he might get a start on the weekend. In terms of the pattern of the game, what can we expect? Is it similar to Forest? They are similar in the respect that they are a team, Crystal Palace, that is, they don't dominate the ball. They average 44% possession this season, which ranks them 17th. Fulham do tend to dominate the ball at home. They also mix up their game well, but they do like to get the ball in the box from wide positions, from crosses. Fulham lead the way in that category. 584 crosses this season, which is comfortably more than the next best, which is Bournemouth and Spurs, who happen to be tied on 538. And their success from the outing against Nottingham Forest came from crosses, didn't it? With Adama Traore's delivery from the right for the first goal for Emile Smith-Rowe, and then the corner, which was headed on, flicked on for Bassi to score what proved to be the winning goal. What was also pleasing in that game from a Fulham perspective was Adama Traore's performance, and you would hope he can continue that form here, and if he can do that, then he's going to cause all sorts of problems for Crystal Palace's wing-back, whoever that may be. You'd think it'd be Tyreek Mitchell, but they brought in Ben Chilwell as well, so either one of those, it's important for Crystal Palace to be alert to that, and you wonder what their tactics might be in looking to stop him. Maybe they might look to double up, certainly do a better job than Nottingham Forest did. Marco Silva will no doubt be pleased by the performance from Adama Traore, not just for the player and the confidence that it'll bring for him, given the way it's gone lately. I mean, let's not forget how he started the season in impressive fashion and kind of just fizzled out for him, but also the way Fulham like to attack. We know how they've been left side dominance this season, how Robinson and Iwobi, the seasons they've had, how they've combined well and have been effective, and a lot of Fulham attacks come from that left side, whereas on the right it's been a little bit lacking at times, certainly since the absence of Kenny Tete, I feel. So with Adama Traore having such an effective game against Nottingham Forest, that just gives them another threat altogether, so it's not all coming from that one side over the left. I spoke a little bit there about team changes for Crystal Palace, what we might be able to expect. For Fulham, I feel like Marco Silva will want desperately to keep the same team, keep that form, keep that momentum going from the last game. Hasn't made too many changes in the league recently. There was a little bit of doubt about Sasa Lukic, came off late on in the win against Forest. I think Marco Silva said afterwards he was hoping it was a bit of fatigue. So I'm not quite up to date on what's gone on there. We'll probably find out a little bit more at the press conference before the game. But Sasa Lukic was another player like Traore. He had a super game against Nottingham Forest. He was everywhere. I think his stats after the game were absolutely immense, and it wasn't just the usual gritty side of his game in the midfield, putting out fires, being the shield for the back four. He was able to contribute to attacks, had a couple of chances himself, contributed to the second goal, of course, with the corner. So if he is out for this one, it'll be a loss for Fulham. There's no doubt about it, given the way he played last time around and generally his overall level of performance this season. It's inevitable he's going to get that 10th booking at some stage. Could possibly happen on the weekend, and he is going to be out of the side for a couple of games. So Fulham will have to cross that bridge when they get there. But I feel like they certainly wouldn't want to lose him for this one. It's an interesting week, isn't it? Because they do have 3 games in such a short space of time. 3 games in 8 days, 2 in the league, and then that FA Cup game against Manchester United. So you wonder what Marco Silva would do with his side, with his squad, how he will look to utilise that. I would be very surprised with 2 games in such a short space of time. The one on Saturday followed by an away trip to Wolves. I would be surprised if he keeps the same team for both of those games. I feel like he will utilise his squad and will look to rotate. We've seen at times Raul Jimenez hasn't been able to play back-to-back games when there's not much time in between games. And with someone like Rodrigo Muniz in his ranks, there's no concerns there about rotation as far as the striking position is concerned. But I feel like the rotation and the changes will come more as we're looking at the Wolves game. I feel like for this game, you want to keep it as similar as possible to what worked so effectively last week against Nottingham Forest. So if Sasa Lukic is fit, then I feel like he will take his place in the starting 11. We will see the exact same team from last week and the exact same team that won as well away at Newcastle, and they'll look to carry that momentum going forward into this one. Look to make it 4 wins in a row, 3 wins in the Premier League in succession, something they haven't managed to do this season. So how do I see the game panning out? Can Fulham make it 4 wins out of the last 4? I feel like they definitely can. You just hope for this one, a London derby. You'll have a good atmosphere again, and Fulham can continue where they left off. 24 shots on goal in the last game, and of course they should have scored more. They should have scored more than the 2 goals that they had, but 2 goals proved to be enough on that occasion. I feel like if they can put in a similar level of performance, they'll give themselves every opportunity to get another 3 points on the board, lift themselves to 7th in the table, at least until Newcastle play their game against Nottingham Forest. Obviously, I've gone through Crystal Palace's away record, their away form, so this is not going to be an easy game by any stretch of the imagination. But hopefully we see a similar level performance to what we saw last week, and Fulham can be a bit more ruthless in front of goal. Then it'll go a long way to getting 3 points on the weekend, and that's what I'm going to go for. I'm going to go for Fulham to notch up another victory, and I'm going to go for the same scoreline. 2-1's been a very popular scoreline for Fulham recently, so I'm going to go for that to continue, that streak to continue. I'm going to go for Fulham, get their noses in front, Crystal Palace to peg them back, and I feel like Fulham will score that winning goal at some point in the second half to propel themselves up to 7th in the table, and then talk will further intensify about prospects of European football. That'll do it for today's episode. A look ahead, look forward to the weekend's game, what we can expect against Crystal Palace. And of course, I will be back next time to recap all of the key events from the afternoon, discuss all the major talking points from the game. All that's left for me to say is thank you all for tuning in. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll catch you all soon.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.